Hey everyone, welcome to The Explainer. So, have you ever stopped to think about how these really abstract, high-level economic rules, the kind of stuff they debate in ivory towers and fancy international summits, how they actually dictate the physical world right outside your window? We usually think of the law as this rigid, permanent set of moral codes, right? But the reality is completely different. The legal system is actually constantly being rewritten by whatever economic theory happens to be trending globally at the time. It's wild. Today, we're going to dive into how these massive shifts in global economic thought completely reshaped the everyday lives of regular citizens. And to do that, we're using Taiwan's dramatic post-war evolution as our masterclass. Okay, let's just dive right into this. We're going to walk through a quick chronological roadmap of three totally distinct global economic eras. We'll start with how economics shapes law, hit the post-war era of state control, pivot into the free market obsession of the 80s and 90s, explore our post-neoliberal reality, and finally wrap up with some vital lessons for the future. All right, Section 1. How economics shapes law, where theory meets reality. So you might be wondering, how do these abstract economic theories actually change the laws you live by every single day? It's a fascinating question. Because listen, economic ideas drafted in places like Washington or Europe, they don't just stay on paper. They have profound on-the-ground consequences. When a global economic consensus changes, governments literally have to invent entirely new legal structures to make that new reality actually function. To see how this started, we have to look back to right after World War II. A whole new academic field popped up called law and development. Now, international organizations like the World Bank began treating the law not just as a set of static rules, but as an active, mechanical tool. The crazy idea here was that you could literally engineer societal growth, pull developing nations out of poverty simply by writing the right laws. It's like they viewed the legal code as a cheat code for the economy. Let's move to Section 2 and see how this builds. The era of state control and the post-war consensus from 1945 to 1980. So for about 3 decades after the war, the global consensus was built on a theory called structuralism. Economists at the time fully believed developing nations needed heavy, top-down state control to basically force industrialization. And in this era, the law essentially acted as a giant bulldozer. The state used administrative laws to aggressively clear the way for industry, control resources, and implement what they called import substitution industrialization. The government was absolutely in the driver's seat here. Now, what's really interesting about this is how it played out on the ground. Check out this incredibly complex state-mandated agricultural extraction mechanism they used in Taiwan during this period. The state set up a strict legal monopoly. Farmers were legally required to surrender their rice to the state in exchange for chemical fertilizer. But here's the catch. The government totally rigged the exchange ratios. They deliberately overvalued the fertilizer and massively undervalued the rice. This legally squeezed the farmers, allowing the state to extract huge agricultural surpluses to fund their own early rapid industrialization. To really wrap your head around the raw power of this state control, just look at this number, 41.2. From 1952 all the way to 1964, 41.2% of Taiwan's total annual exports came from just one single state-owned monopoly, the Taiwan Sugar Corporation. Think about that. The state completely controlled sugarcane production, guaranteed the buyback prices, and hoarded all the foreign exchange. It was an incredibly powerful top-down system, totally governed by strict administrative law. But as we know, nothing lasts forever, right? By the 1970s and 80s, these state-led strategies were seriously stagnating on a global scale. And here is where we see a massive pendulum swing. The law completely transitioned from being a heavy-handed state tool, our bulldozer, to acting merely as a market referee. Which brings us to Section 3, the free market pivot, fueled by the Washington Consensus between 1980 and 1995. In the 1980s, global trust shifted drastically. People moved away from trusting government bureaucrats and put all their faith into the free market mechanism. Under this new dominant theory, neoliberalism, the law's whole job description changed virtually overnight. It was totally stripped of its bulldozer status and forced to become a mere referee. The new rules of the game? Deregulation, selling off state-owned enterprises to the private sector, and fiercely protecting private property rights. The administrative state was basically told to step back, sit on the sidelines, and just blow the whistle if someone cheated. The global push to create these free markets was intense. I mean, take a look at this quote from Anatoly Chabayas. He's an economist who spearheaded Russia's privatization. He said, "They steal and steal. There's nothing they don't steal. But let them steal. They will be the good owners and managers of this property. Wow, that dramatically highlights the absolute extreme lengths proponents went to. They wanted to rapidly create a capitalist property class out of former state-controlled economies so badly, they were willing to entirely look past severe corruption just to get those assets into private hands. And this brilliantly illustrates how that exact same global neoliberal pressure, when combined with Taiwan's own internal democratic transition, sparked a massive timeline of privatization. Opposition parties and capitalists alike were challenging the old state monopolies. Look at the timeline. By 1989, a privatization task force was formed. By 1991, laws were amended to break up utility monopolies. And by 1996, selling off public enterprises wasn't just an idea, it was the national consensus. All right, moving into section 4, the post-neoliberal reality, or as I like to call it, the messy middle ground from 1995 to 2005. So, as you might guess, this extreme pivot to the free market hit some pretty serious speed bumps. By the late 90s, the spectacular failures of rapid shock therapy privatization in places like Eastern Europe forced a global realization: local institutions and social trust actually matter. You can't just copy-paste a free market onto a country without the right legal foundation in place. The law couldn't just be a passive referee anymore, it had to step up and act as a safety net. Economists like Amartya Sen started arguing that development isn't just about pure textbook market efficiency, it's about human freedom. The law absolutely must prioritize basic human needs, constitutional checks and balances, and public participation. We actually saw this messy reality play out in Taiwan's own privatization process. Critics were quick to point out a trend of what they called pseudo-privatization. Basically, the government would strategically reduce its shares to just under 50% to dodge strict public oversight, while still retaining ultimate control behind the scenes. There were massive, widespread fears of crony capitalism, as all these public assets were being sold off. And there were very real human costs here. When the Taiwan Motor Bus Company was privatized for pure profit, they completely suspended essential remote bus routes. This literally left elderly and vulnerable populations in rural villages stranded, without their only mode of transportation to hospitals and schools. Let's head into our final part, Section 5, Lessons for the Future and Forging a Unique Path. So the crucial point to take away from all of this is that abstract economic theories from abroad can never just be forcefully applied to local realities without causing some major friction. Look at this cheat sheet here. It perfectly summarizes this massive pendulum swing of global economic thought over 50 years. We started in the structuralist era, where the law was a bulldozer actively building state industry. Then we swung to the neoliberal era, where the law was just a referee maintaining market order. And finally, we landed in the post-neoliberal era, where the law has to be a safety net, an end in itself, meant to protect human capability and basic rights. Nobel laureate Gunnar Myrdal actually left us with a pretty powerful warning about this exact cycle. He said, "It would be very sad if young economists from the undeveloped regions were to be obsessed with the economic ideas of the advanced countries." He was urging developing nations not to just blindly copy-paste Western textbook theories, but instead to build their own frameworks based on their own unique historical and social needs. And that leaves us with a final, really provocative thought to ponder. As the global economy continues to shift and evolve today, should developing nations forge their own completely unique paths, rather than constantly borrowing those textbook theories from the West? The relationship between law, economics, and society is undeniably messy. And if history shows us anything, it's that the rules of the game are always written in pencil. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember, keep questioning the rules you live by.